The camera slowly pans across the charred remains of a burned building as ash drifts through golden morning light. A woman's weathered hand picks up a half-melted key from the rubble. There are two kinds of fires in this world, the kind that destroys and the kind that cleanses. In Redemption Creek, they say the truth lies buried beneath the floorboards of a place where weary souls once found shelter. Not gold, as rumors claim something far more valuable and far more dangerous. When shots ring out in the night, it's rarely about who fired first. It's about the silences that came before, the whispered deals, the averted eyes, the compromises good people make, telling themselves it's for peace. But peace built on secrets is just a pretty cage, and every cage eventually breaks. They say you can't outrun your past in these lands, that yesterday's sins will find you no matter how deep you bury them. They're right. Morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the Last Chance Saloon, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Martha Caldwell wiped down the bar counter with practiced efficiency, her weathered hands moving in circular motions that had become as natural as breathing. At 45, Martha carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived more than most. The lines around her eyes deepened when she smiled, which wasn't often these days. The tavern stood at the crossroads of Redemption Creek, a fitting name for a town divided between wealthy landowners and the growing population of migrants seeking work in the silver mines to the north. The Last Chance was neither fancy enough for the elite nor rough enough for the desperate. It existed in the in-between, much like Martha herself. Morning Martha called Jake Winters from his usual corner table. The locals called him the Ghost for the way he could appear and disappear without notice, a skill honed during his years as a bounty hunter. His eyes constantly scanned the room, a habit that Death himself couldn't break. Martha nodded in acknowledgement as she placed a coffee before him. "Sleep well, Jake?" "Well as can be expected," he replied, his voice like gravel. "Dreams don't get quieter with age." Jake was one of 5 former gunslingers who had made the Last Chance their unofficial headquarters. They'd all hung up their guns, theoretically, and found in Martha's establishment a place where the past rarely came knocking. The others would filter in throughout the day, Blackjack Reynolds with his trademark black coat despite the desert heat, Miguel Ortega, whose knife skills were legendary across 3 territories, Frank Cooper, the oldest of the bunch, with hands that still didn't shake when it mattered, and Doc Sullivan, who'd been both the cause of and solution to many bullet wounds in his time. Martha poured herself a small glass of whiskey, a morning ritual that raised eyebrows only among newcomers. The regulars knew it was her way of toasting Sheriff Thomas Caldwell, her husband, 7 years dead. "Going to be hot today," Martha remarked, glancing out the window at the cloudless sky. Jake didn't respond, his attention drawn to a stranger passing by, outside, a thin man with a notebook writing as he walked. "Third outsider this week," he muttered. Martha had noticed them too. Strangers asking questions about the town's history, about the land beneath the Last Chance, about buried treasure. The rumor had started months ago that Thomas Caldwell had hidden gold beneath the floorboards of the saloon before his death. Martha knew better. What lay beneath wasn't gold, but something far more valuable to certain people and far more dangerous. Doc Sullivan arrived at noon carrying his medical bag, though it had been years since he'd practiced with any regularity. At 62, his once steady hands now had a slight tremor, but his mind remained sharp. He ordered his usual coffee with a splash of bourbon and sat beside Jake. "Meeting at sundown," Doc said quietly. "Frank spotted riders at the North Pass." Jake stared into his cup. "Could be nothing." "Could be," Doc agreed, though neither believed it. Martha approached with Doc's drink. "Rider coming in fast," she said, nodding toward the window. A cloud of dust approached from the east, resolving into the figure of Will Parker, Redemption Creek's current sheriff. At 35, Parker was young for the job, but he'd proven capable enough during his 3 years wearing the badge. He dismounted outside and entered the saloon, removing his hat as he stepped into the relative cool of the interior. "Martha?" He nodded. "Gentlemen." "What brings you here before your usual dinner hour, Sheriff?" Martha asked, already reaching for a glass of water. Parker accepted it gratefully. "Just making rounds. Heard there might be trouble brewing. What kind of trouble? Doc asked, his voice carefully neutral. Talk in Carson City about Silas Blackwood being seen in these parts. The name fell like a stone in still water. 7 years ago, Blackwood and his gang had ridden into Redemption Creek. When they left, Thomas Caldwell was dead, and the last chance had nearly burned to the ground. Martha had rebuilt it board by board, nail by nail. If Blackwood shows his face here, Jake said softly, he won't leave breathing. Parker shook his head. That kind of talk doesn't help, Jake. We have laws now. Laws didn't help Thomas. Martha interjected, her voice steady, despite the tremor that ran through her body at the mention of Blackwood's name. I know, Parker said more gently. Just wanted to give you all a heads up. I've sent for additional deputies from the territorial office. They should arrive within the week. After Parker left, silence hung heavy in the air. Martha moved mechanically behind the bar, arranging bottles that didn't need arranging. He's right about one thing, Doc said finally. Times have changed. Redemption Creek isn't the same town it was 7 years ago. People don't change that much, Jake countered. Just get better at hiding who they really are. Martha said nothing, but her hand instinctively went to the small key she wore around her neck, the key to the cellar where Thomas had kept his most important documents. Documents that could bring down half the powerful men in the territory if they ever came to light. By evening, the last chance had filled with its usual mix of patrons. Miguel Ortega sat at a table near the back, playing solitaire with a deck of worn cards. At 50, his once black hair was now streaked with silver, but the knives strapped to his belt were as polished as ever. Blackjack Reynolds nursed a whiskey at the bar, watching the doors with dark hooded eyes. Frank Cooper sat nearby, his weathered face a map of a life lived hard. Martha moved among them, refilling glasses and exchanging brief pleasantries. To outsiders, it might have seemed like any other evening at a frontier saloon, but the regulars could feel it tension, thick as smoke. The room quieted momentarily as the door swung open, admitting a young man Martha didn't recognize. Tall, lean, with eager eyes that took in everything. Evening, he said, approaching the bar. Name's Eli Ward, looking for work. Martha assessed him with a practiced eye. What kind of work? Any kind you're offering, ma'am. I'm handy with repairs, good with numbers, don't mind cleaning. Blackjack snorted. Town's full of drifters looking for easy money. What makes you special, boy? Eli didn't flinch. Nothing special about working hard, sir. Just need a fair chance. Martha considered him. Her barman, old Tim, had been complaining about his arthritis getting worse, and with trouble possibly coming. Kitchen needs cleaning. Start there. We'll see how you do. The young man's face lit up. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. As he disappeared into the kitchen, Jake caught Martha's eye from across the room and raised an eyebrow. Martha gave an almost imperceptible shrug. New faces meant new eyes, new ears. Sometimes that was useful. Later that night, after the last patron had staggered home, and Eli had been sent to sleep in the small room off the kitchen, Martha locked the front doors and joined the 5 men gathered around a table in the back. Frank Cooper laid out a map of the area. Riders spotted here, here, and here, he said, pointing to locations surrounding Redemption Creek. Moving in a pattern, watching the town. Blackwood's men, Miguel asked, his accent thickening, as it always did when tension rose. Possibly, Frank said. Or could be land speculators. There's been talk in town about building a railroad spur through here. Doc Sullivan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Railroad would change everything. Bring money, people. And those who prey on both, Blackjack added darkly. Martha stood with her arms crossed. If it's Blackwood, he's not just coming for the town. He's coming for what he thinks is under my floorboards. Jake looked at her sharply. You never did tell us what's really down there, Martha. She met his gaze steadily. And I don't plan to. But I'll tell you this, it's not gold. It's something certain people would kill to keep buried, and others would kill to expose. Thomas's documents, Doc said quietly, from his time as sheriff. Martha nodded slowly. Evidence of deals made crimes covered up. Names of men who now sit in territorial government Run banks own half the land between here and Carson City. And Blackwood knows about them, Miguel asked. He knows there's something. Thomas threatened him with exposure if he ever returned. It worked until Thomas was killed. So why come back now? Blackjack wondered aloud. Because someone paid him to, Jake said, voicing what they all suspected. Someone who wants those documents destroyed once and for all. The silence that followed was broken by Frank. We need to be ready. Check our supplies, secure the building. Come. Martha looked around at these men, each carrying his own history of violence and regret. They'd come to her tavern seeking peace, a place to wait out their remaining years. Now they were preparing for war. I won't ask you to fight my battles, she said. Blackjack laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. Your battles became ours the day we decided this was home, Martha. The others nodded in agreement, but Martha noticed Doc's hesitation, brief, almost imperceptible. As the meeting broke up and the men headed to their respective rooms upstairs, she watched Doc linger behind his eyes, troubled. Something on your mind, Doc? She asked quietly. He startled slightly. Just thinking about what a shame it is. This town was finally finding peace. Peace built on secrets isn't really peace, Doc. He nodded slowly. Maybe, but it's often all we get in this life. With that, he picked up his medical bag and headed upstairs, leaving Martha alone with her thoughts. The next morning, Martha was up before dawn, checking the shotgun she kept beneath the bar and counting ammunition. Eli arrived early, eager to prove himself. Lot of guns for a saloon, ma'am, he observed as she locked a rifle cabinet. Martha gave him a measured look. Frontier has its own rules, Mr. Ward. Yes, ma'am. My pa used to say the same. He ran a store up in Montana Territory before the fever took him. There was something genuine in the young man's manner that made Martha want to trust him. Still, these were dangerous times. The bar needs polishing, then help Tim with the deliveries when they arrive. Throughout the day, Martha noticed subtle changes in town. More people on the streets watching The Last Chance. Whispers when she walked by the general store. Sheriff Parker seemed to be everywhere, speaking with townspeople, his face grave. At midday, Martha was surprised when Elizabeth Hargrove entered the saloon. As the wife of Judge Hargrove, the most powerful man in the region, Elizabeth rarely ventured into establishments like The Last Chance. Mrs. Caldwell, she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of Eastern education. Might we speak privately? Martha led her to a small table in the corner, away from the few daytime patrons. What can I do for you, Mrs. Hargrove? Elizabeth removed her gloves carefully. I've come to make you an offer. My husband is concerned about the stability of this establishment. The Last Chance has stood for 15 years. Yes, but times are changing. The Railroad Commission is considering a route through Redemption Creek. Development would follow. Progress. Martha waited, saying nothing. Judge Hargrove and his associates would like to purchase your property at a very generous price. Elizabeth named a sum that would have made Martha wealthy by local standards. Not interested, Martha replied immediately. Elizabeth's pleasant expression didn't waver. I urge you to reconsider. The offer won't remain open indefinitely. Is that a threat, Mrs. Hargrove? Simply a reality of business. Property values fluctuate. She rose, pulling her gloves back on, especially when unfortunate events occur. Fires, accidents. After Elizabeth left, Jake emerged from the shadows where he'd been listening. Sounds like the vultures are circling. Martha's jaw was tight. Judge Hargrove has always wanted this land. Claims it's because we're at the crossroads, but he knows what's buried here. He's in those documents, isn't he? She nodded slowly. Him and half the territorial council. Thomas kept detailed records of every bribe, every corrupt deal, every time justice was sold to the highest bidder. Then why didn't he expose them when he was alive? Martha sighed. Because he was part of it, Jake. He took their money too at first. By the time he wanted out, he was in too deep. The documents were his insurance policy. And now they're yours. Martha looked around the saloon at the worn wooden floors. She'd replaced herself the bar where Thomas had once stood, the walls that had witnessed so much of the territory's hidden history. This place isn't just a building, Jake. It's all that's left of the man Thomas wanted to be. not the man he was. She touched the key around her neck. And those documents aren't just paper. They're the truth this town has been running from. That afternoon, Frank Cooper arrived with troubling news. Town meeting called for tomorrow. Judge Hargrove's pushing for new ordinances, restricting saloon hours, raising license fees. Trying to drive you out legally, Blackjack remarked. Martha had expected as much. In Blackwood, still no sign of him directly, Frank said. But strangers keep arriving. Not all of them look like railroad men. The door opened and Sheriff Parker entered, looking uncomfortable. He tipped his hat to Martha. Mrs. Caldwell, gentlemen, just letting folks know we've had reports of trouble on the North Road. Travelers robbed yesterday. Blackwood? Jake asked directly. Parker shrugged. Descriptions match. I'd advise people to stay in town, travel in groups if necessary. After he left, Doc Sullivan spoke up from his corner. Seems to me this town's heading for a reckoning. Maybe it's time we considered Martha's options. I'm not selling, Martha said firmly. Doc raised his hands placatingly. Not suggesting that, but maybe there's a middle path. Those documents, they're a danger to you as long as you have them. They're my protection, Martha countered. Or they're what's drawing Blackwood here, Doc argued. What if we move them somewhere safe away from town? Martha studied Doc carefully. His suggestion made a certain kind of sense, but something in his manner raised her suspicions. The documents stay where they are, she said finally. But I appreciate your concern, Doc. Later, as Martha was checking supplies in the storeroom, she heard voices from the alley behind the saloon. Moving quietly to the back door, she listened. Can't just wait forever, a voice was saying. It sounded like Doc Sullivan. Patience, replied another voice unfamiliar to Martha. The boss wants this done clean. No unnecessary bloodshed. There won't be peace until those papers are gone, Doc insisted. You promised me, and we'll keep our word. But remember you're his old man. When the time comes, you make sure they're all inside. Martha's blood ran cold. Doc Sullivan, one of Thomas's oldest friends, was collaborating with the enemy. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. She eased away from the door and returned to the main room, her mind racing. She caught Jake's eye across the room and gestured slightly with her head. He joined her at the bar, his expression questioning. Doc's turned, she whispered. I heard him in the alley talking to someone about making sure we're all inside when the time comes. Jake's face hardened. You sure? Heard it with my own ears. He nodded slowly. I'll keep an eye on him. Don't let on that we know. Why would he do this? Martha asked, the pain of betrayal evident in her voice. Jake considered the question. Doc's always believed in peace above all else. Maybe he thinks removing those documents will finally let this town rest. At what cost? That's always the question, isn't it? Jake replied grimly. What price is worth paying for peace? As evening fell, the atmosphere in the last chance grew increasingly tense. Martha noticed Doc watching her with troubled eyes. The betrayal stung, but she maintained her composure, serving drinks and making conversation as if nothing had changed. Eli proved surprisingly capable, moving efficiently between tables and handling rowdy patrons with unexpected authority. Martha found herself grateful for the extra help as the saloon filled to capacity. Shortly before midnight, Sheriff Parker returned, this time with 2 deputies. He approached Martha at the bar. Got word Blackwood's gang was spotted 10 miles south, he said quietly. Thought you should know. Thank you, Sheriff. Martha replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I've posted men around town, but we're stretched thin. Parker hesitated. Martha, if you've got anything valuable here, now might be the time to move it. Martha met his eyes. Everything valuable to me is already right here, Sheriff. After Parker left, Martha gathered Jake, Miguel, Blackjack, and Frank in her small office behind the bar. Conspicuously absent was Doc Sullivan, who was kept busy by Miguel asking for help with an old wound that was acting up. Blackwood's coming, Martha said without preamble, and Doc's working with them. Frank's weathered face registered shock. Doc, impossible. I heard him myself, Martha insisted, making deals with someone in the alley. Blackjack's expression darkened. Always thought he was too fond of talking instead of shooting. The why doesn't matter right now, Jake cut in. What matters is we've got a traitor among us and enemies at the gate. Martha nodded. We need to be ready. But there's something else you should know. She took a deep breath. The town's turning against us too. That meeting tomorrow, it's not just about ordinances. Judge Hargrove's been spreading rumors that I'm harboring criminals, that the last chance is bringing danger to Redemption Creek. He's not entirely wrong, Miguel said with a grim smile. What do you propose? Frank asked. Martha's eyes were hard. We protect what's ours, but we don't fire first. Blackwood wants those documents, and he'll have to come through us to get them. And Doc? Blackjack asked. Martha felt the weight of the decision. Doc Sullivan had been Thomas's friend long before he was hers. Despite his betrayal, she couldn't bring herself to order his death. We watch him, she decided. Use him to feed false information. When Blackwood comes, Doc will learn the price of betrayal. The men nodded in agreement, their faces solemn in the lamplight. Each had faced death before, had dealt it out with skilled hands. But this fight felt different, a last stand for a way of life that was rapidly disappearing beneath the relentless march of civilization. As they filed out of her office, Martha caught Jake's arm. There's one more thing, she said quietly. If things go badly, burn the documents. All of them. Better they're destroyed than fall into Hargrove's hands. Jake studied her face. Those papers are your only leverage. They're also my burden, Martha replied. Thomas thought they would protect him. Instead, they got him killed. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust through the streets of Redemption Creek. From her window, Martha could see lights burning late in Judge Hargrove's mansion on the hill overlooking the town. In the distance, barely visible in the moonlight, riders approached from the south. The threshold of the past had been crossed. Whatever lay buried beneath the last chance gold secrets or sins would soon be unearthed, one way or another. In her room later that night, Martha took out the faded photograph of Thomas she kept by her bed. His eyes stared back at her, secretive, even in stillness. She had loved him, but had she ever truly known him? I've protected your secrets, Thomas, she whispered to the image, but now they might get us all killed. She replaced the photograph and checked her revolver before placing it under her pillow. Morning would come soon enough, and with it the reckoning that had been 7 years in the making. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek with an eerie calm. Martha Caldwell stood on the small balcony outside her room above the last chance, watching as the town slowly came to life. Merchants opened their shops, miners trudged toward the northern hills, and farmers brought wagons loaded with produce for the market day. On the surface, everything appeared normal, but Martha knew better. She noticed the subtle changes, groups of townspeople huddled in conversation, falling silent as Sheriff Parker passed. Strangers loitering at street corners, watching the last chance with predatory patience. Judge Hargrove's men distributing papers outside the general store. Behind her, Jake, the ghost Winters, stepped onto the balcony, a steaming cup of coffee in his scarred hands. They're moving pieces into position, he observed quietly, setting the board. Martha nodded. Blackwood was never one for direct approaches. He likes to weaken his targets first. The town meeting's at noon, Jake reminded her. You going? Have to. If I don't show, they'll say I've got something to hide. Kaidini. Jake's weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Doc left early this morning. Said he needed supplies from Carson City. Did he now? Martha's voice was flat. And did our Mr. Ward follow him? Jake nodded. Eli's keeping his distance, but he'll report back if Doc meets anyone interesting. Martha had revealed her suspicions about Doc Sullivan to Jake the previous night, and they'd agreed to have the young barman follow him. Eli Ward had proven himself surprisingly resourceful, perhaps too resourceful for a simple drifter looking for work. You trust the boy? Jake asked, echoing her thoughts. Martha sighed. No, but right now he's useful. Inside the saloon, Miguel Ortega and Blackjack Reynolds were quietly reinforcing the building's vulnerabilities, checking window shutters, reinforcing the back door, moving supplies to secure locations. Frank Cooper had gone to scout the surrounding area, keeping watch for Blackwood's men. Martha descended the stairs to find several townspeople already gathered at the bar, including Harold Weber the banker and Sam Dixon, who owned the general store. "Morning, gentlemen," Martha greeted them, her face revealing nothing of her concerns. "What brings you in so early?" Weber cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Just wanted a word before the meeting, Martha." "About—" Dixon glanced nervously at the door. "There's talk, Martha, about trouble coming, about why it's coming." Martha poured coffee for them both, her movements deliberate. "Trouble has a name, Silas Blackwood, and he's coming because that's what he does. Some folks are saying he's coming for something specific," Weber pressed. "Something hidden here. People have been telling tales about buried treasure in the Last Chance for years," Martha replied evenly. "Doesn't make them true." Dixon leaned closer. "It's not about treasure, Martha. It's about what Thomas kept in his records." Martha's hand paused imperceptibly before continuing to wipe the bar. "My husband was the sheriff. He kept many records." "Records that could hurt people," Weber whispered. "Important people." Martha met his gaze directly. "Are you worried you might be in those records, Harold?" The banker recoiled as if slapped. "I've always been a friend to you, Martha. Then as my friend tell me who's been spreading these rumors." Dixon and Weber exchanged glances. "Judge Hargrove's been talking to the business owners," Dixon admitted. "Says the Last Chance is a liability to the town's future, that as long as it stands will never have peace. The judge has wanted this land since before Thomas died," Martha said coldly. "Seems convenient that trouble arrives just when he's making another push for it." Martha Weber said, lowering his voice further, "There's talk of a vote to revoke your license." Martha's expression didn't change, but internally her anger flared. "On what grounds? Public nuisance? Safety concerns?" Weber looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Judge Hargrove has documents complaints from citizens' reports of violence." "Fabricated," Martha stated. Dixon nodded reluctantly. "Probably, but people are scared, Martha. The railroad's coming, bringing opportunity. Folks don't want to lose that because of old business." After they left, Jake emerged from the shadows. "They're turning the town against you." "They're trying," Martha corrected, "but it takes more than rumors to close the Last Chance." The town meeting was held in the newly built courthouse, a structure of imposing stone that represented Judge Hargrove's vision for Redemption Creek's future. Martha arrived to find the room already packed, the atmosphere tense with anticipation. Judge Hargrove sat at the front, his silver hair and tailored suit marking him as different from the roughly dressed townspeople. At 60, Hargrove had the bearing of a man accustomed to power and to being obeyed. Sheriff Parker stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. He nodded slightly to Martha as she entered, but didn't approach. Martha took a seat near the back, aware of the whispers and glances that followed her. Blackjack had insisted on accompanying her, and he sat beside her, his dark presence a shield against the hostility in the room. Judge Hargrove called the meeting to order, his resonant voice filling the space. "Citizens of Redemption Creek, we gather at a pivotal moment in our town's history," he began. "The territorial governor has confirmed that the Railroad Commission has approved a spur line through our community." Murmurs of excitement rippled through the crowd. "This represents progress, prosperity, and opportunity," Hargrove continued. "But it also requires that we present ourselves as a civilized, orderly community worthy of such investment." His eyes found Martha in the crowd. "Unfortunately, there are elements in our town that threaten this future. Establishments that attract undesirable characters, that harbor remnants of a violent past we've worked hard to leave behind." Martha felt the weight of eyes turning toward her. "I've received numerous complaints about disturbances at the Last Chance Saloon," Hargrove announced, holding up a sheaf of papers. "Drunkenness, fighting suspicious characters. More concerning are intelligence reports suggesting that known criminals, including the notorious Silas Blackwood, have been drawn to our town specifically because of the Last Chance." Angry murmurs rose from the crowd. Martha stood. "If I may address these accusations, Judge," she asked, her voice clear and steady. Hargrove looked displeased but nodded reluctantly. "The Last Chance has stood at the crossroads of this town for 15 years, Martha said, looking around at faces she'd known for most of her adult life. We've served you drinks when you celebrated, provided meals, when you were hungry, offered beds when you needed shelter. My husband, your sheriff, died protecting this town from Silas Blackwood. She paused, letting that sink in. Now, Judge Hargrove would have you believe that Blackwood is coming because of me. The truth is simpler. Blackwood is a predator. He's coming because this town is prospering, because the railroad brings opportunity for theft, extortion, and control. Martha pointed directly at Hargrove. The judge has tried to buy my property 3 times in the past year. Each time I've refused. Now suddenly my business is a threat to the town. Sheriff Parker stepped forward. Mrs. Caldwell raises a fair point. We don't have any direct evidence linking the last chance to Blackwood's return. Hargrove's face darkened. What we have, Sheriff, is a pattern. Violence follows certain establishments and certain people. An elderly woman near the front stood shakily. Martha recognized Mrs. Peterson, who had lived in Redemption Creek since its founding. I've known Martha Caldwell since she was Martha Collins, Mrs. Peterson said firmly. She's a good woman who rebuilt after tragedy. Judge, I think many of us find the timing of these complaints suspicious. Others began to speak up, some defending Martha, others supporting Hargrove. The meeting devolved into heated debate with the town clearly divided. Finally, Hargrove raised his hand for silence. It seems we need more time to consider this matter. I propose we establish a committee to investigate these concerns and report back in 1 week. As people filed out after the meeting, Martha found herself approached by Sheriff Parker. That bought you some time, he said quietly. But Hargrove won't give up. I know, Martha replied. What I don't know is where you stand in all this will. Parker glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. I stand for the law, Martha, but even I can see when it's being twisted to serve private interests. Hargrove's using Blackwood as an excuse, Martha said. Maybe. Parker hesitated. But Blackwood is coming. My deputies spotted his scouts yesterday. Whatever's bringing him gold revenge or something else, he'll be here soon. And when he comes, Parker's eyes were troubled. I've sworn to protect this town. All of it. He touched the brim of his hat. Be careful, Martha. Hargrove has more supporters than you think. As Martha and Blackjack left the courthouse, she noticed a crowd gathering near the general store. A tall, lean man stood on a crate addressing the onlookers with passionate gestures. Oh, who's that? She asked a passing townsperson. Calls himself Anderson. Been talking about forming a citizens committee for safety. Says we can't rely on the sheriff to protect us from outlaws. Martha moved closer to listen, Blackjack a shadow at her side. The peace we've enjoyed is fragile, Anderson was saying, his voice carrying the polished cadence of education. When violence threatens ordinary citizens must band together. Redemption Creek belongs to all of you, not to outlaws, not to those who harbor them. His eyes found Martha in the crowd, and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Though she'd never seen him before, something about that smile sent a chill through her. It was the smile of a predator, savoring the moment before the strike. I've seen what happens when good people stand aside, Anderson continued. I've buried family because of men like Silas Blackwood. But Blackwood is merely a symptom. The disease is the environment that attracts such men. Murmurs of agreement rose from some listeners. The Last Chance Saloon has been a haven for gunmen, gamblers, and outlaws for too long, Anderson declared. As citizens, we have the right, no, the duty to demand its closure before more blood is spilled. Martha had heard enough. As she turned to leave, she noticed others doing the same. Some in agreement with Anderson, others in disgust. The divisions in town were deepening by the hour. That man works for Blackwood, Blackjack muttered as they walked back toward the Last Chance. You recognize him? Not him specifically, but I recognize the type. He's setting the stage, turning the town against itself before Blackwood even shows his face. Martha nodded grimly. And Hargrove's playing right into it, or worse, collaborating. Cool. When they reached the Last Chance, they found Miguel Ortega in serious conversation with a trail-worn rider. The man, one of Miguel's contacts from his days scouting for the Army, had ridden hard to bring news. Blackwood's gang was in Carson City 3 days ago. Miguel reported once the rider had left. 15 men well armed. They were asking questions about Redemption Creek, about the last chance. Just 15. Blackjack frowned. Blackwood usually rides with twice that number. Fun. Maybe the others are already here, Martha suggested. Like our friend Anderson. The front doors opened and Eli Ward entered, looking exhausted. He nodded to Martha and headed straight for the bar, where he poured himself a whiskey with the familiarity of a much longer employee. Martha joined him. Find what you were looking for. Eli downed the whiskey in one swallow. Doc Sullivan met with a man halfway to Carson City, slender fellow, well-dressed. They talked for about 15 minutes, then Doc continued to town. You hear what they discussed? No, ma'am, but Doc handed something over, looked like papers. Martha exchanged glances with Blackjack. Information about our defenses, most likely. There's something else, Eli added, lowering his voice. On my way back, I spotted riders watching the town. 4 men keeping their distance. Professional-like. Before Martha could respond, the front doors burst open again. Frank Cooper staggered in blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Frank! Martha rushed to help him to a chair. Ambushed? Frank gasped. 3 miles east. 4 men. Would have killed me, but a wagon train came along the road. Blackjack brought water and bandages while Miguel checked the old gunman's wounds. Just a graze, Miguel concluded, cleaning the head wound. But he's lost blood. Did you recognize them? Martha asked, holding Frank's hand. The old man shook his head weakly. Wore bandanas over their faces, but one had a voice I recognized, nasal distinctive. He was at that meeting in Tucson 3 years back. Martha looked up in alarm. The meeting where Thomas confronted Judge Hargrove about the land disputes. Frank nodded. Same man. Called himself Jenkins then. Rest now, Martha told him, squeezing his hand. You're safe. As Miguel helped Frank upstairs to recover, Martha paced the empty saloon. They're closing in, Jake, pressing from all sides. Jake, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. We need to draw them out. Force Blackwood to show his hand before the town turns completely against us. How? Give them what they want or make them think we are? Martha considered this. You mean the documents? Jake nodded. Start a rumor that you're moving them. Tonight. It's risky, Blackjack interjected. If they attack in force? They won't, Jake insisted. Blackwood's too smart for that. He wants to keep the town on his side. He'll send a small group thinking to catch us unprepared. Martha weighed their options. With Doc betraying them, the townsfolk turning hostile, and Blackwood's men encircling like wolves, they needed to change the dynamic. Do it, she decided, but we control the battlefield. They come to us on our terms. Night fell over Redemption Creek, bringing with it an unnatural silence. The last chance remained open for business, but few customers ventured inside. Those who did were mostly loyal regulars, miners and farmers, who had known Martha for years and weren't swayed by Judge Hargrove's accusations. Eli moved among the tables, collecting glasses and engaging in quiet conversation. To casual observers, it appeared a normal, if subdued, evening at the saloon. In reality, every aspect of the night's operation had been carefully arranged. Miguel was positioned on the roof, watching the surrounding streets with the patience of a hunter. Blackjack manned the bar, giving Martha freedom to move about, checking defenses and speaking with their allies among the patrons. Jake had disappeared hours earlier, becoming the ghost his nickname suggested, moving unseen through town to spread their fabricated rumor. Martha Caldwell would be moving valuable documents from the last chance that night, fearing the town council's decision might go against her. Doc Sullivan had returned from Carson City late in the afternoon, carrying medical supplies and offering no explanation for his extended absence. Martha had greeted him warmly, betraying nothing of her knowledge of his betrayal. Now he sat at his usual table, nursing a whiskey and occasionally glancing toward the cellar door with poorly concealed interest. At 10 o'clock, Martha made a show of speaking privately with Blackjack, then disappeared into her office. Through the window, Doc would have seen her retrieving a metal box from a hidden safe, then placing documents inside. When she emerged, she caught Doc watching and offered him a tight smile. Evening getting late, Doc. Expecting company. He started visibly. No, no, just enjoying the quiet. It is quiet, Martha agreed. Too quiet for my liking. She moved to check on Frank Cooper, who was resting in one of the upstairs rooms. The old gunman was pale but alert. Anything? He asked as she entered. Martha shook her head. Not yet, but they'll come. Should be down there. Frank insisted, trying to rise. Martha gently pushed him back. You've done your part. Rest now. When she returned downstairs, she found Sheriff Parker had arrived. He stood at the bar speaking quietly with Blackjack. Sheriff, Martha greeted him. What brings you here at this hour? Parker's face was grave. Thought you should know there's trouble brewing. Anderson's formed his Citizens Committee. They're meeting at the Hargrove estate right now. Planning what exactly they're calling it a safety inspection. They want to search the last chance for weapons contraband. Martha's eyes narrowed. They have no authority for that. They claim they do as concerned citizens, protecting their town, and, Parker hesitated, they've deputized themselves. Vigilantes, Blackjack growled. How many? Martha asked. 20, maybe 30. Shopkeepers, ranchers. Good people, Martha, but scared. Anderson's got them believing Blackwood's coming specifically for the last chance that the whole town will burn if they don't act. Martha studied Parker's troubled face. And where do you stand in this, Sheriff? Parker straightened. I stand for the law. I've told them they have no legal right to search private property without cause or warrant. But Martha, they're armed. The implications were clear. Parker's small force couldn't or wouldn't stop a determined group of townspeople if they decided to take matters into their own hands. When are, Martha asked. Tomorrow morning. They're giving you the night to reconsider your position. After Parker left, Martha gathered her remaining allies, Blackjack, Eli, and the reluctant Doc Sullivan. Miguel remained on watch outside, and Jake had not yet returned from town. They're squeezing us from both sides, Martha explained. Blackwood's men watch from the shadows while Anderson turns the town against us. By morning, we could face an angry mob on our doorstep. We should leave, Doc suggested, a hint of desperation in his voice. Take whatever valuables you need and abandon the last chance before blood is spilled. Blackjack fixed Doc with a cold stare. Running's not an option, Doc. Or is that what your friends are counting on? Doc paled. What are you implying? Martha intervened before the confrontation could escalate. No one's running. This is my home. I'll defend it against Blackwood, against the town if necessary. Against the whole town, Doc pressed. These aren't outlaws, Martha. They're your neighbors. Neighbors don't threaten neighbors with illegal searches and vigilante justice, Martha replied firmly. Besides, I doubt it's the whole town. Parker said 20 or 30 Hargrove's people most likely. A sudden whistle from outside Miguel's signal interrupted their discussion. Moments later, the back door opened, and Jake slipped inside, his expression tense. Blackwood's men are moving, he reported. 6 of them approaching from the east, staying in the shadows. Martha nodded. Just as we expected. Doc, you should head upstairs, check on Frank. It was a transparent attempt to remove him from the action, but Doc didn't protest, seemingly relieved to have an excuse to withdraw. Once Doc was out of earshot, Martha turned to Jake. You think they took the bait? They're coming cautiously, professional. They'll try the back entrance, avoid any witnesses. And Anderson's vigilantes, Martha asked. Still meeting at Hargrove's. But there's something else. I spotted Silas Blackwood himself. He's here in town. Martha's blood ran cold. Where? Staying at the new hotel on Pine Street, registered under a false name. But it's him, and he's not alone. Elizabeth Hargrove visited him tonight. The pieces suddenly aligned in Martha's mind. So that's it. Not just Judge Hargrove, but his wife too. Blackjack nodded grimly. The whole damn town's rotten. Positions, Martha ordered. Eli, douse the lamps in the main room, but leave one burning in my office. Jake, the cellar. Blackjack, kitchen door. The men moved quickly, each taking up their assigned posts. Martha retrieved the shotgun from beneath the bar and checked the loads. The metal box, their bait, sat prominently on her desk, visible through the partially open office door. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour. The last chance settled into an eerie quiet, the only sounds the occasional creak of the building, and the distant barking of a dog somewhere in town. The attack when it came was swift and coordinated. The back door lock was picked with professional skill, and 4 men slipped inside, moving quietly toward Martha's office. From her position behind the bar, Martha could just make out their silhouettes. Professional killers, not common bandits. The trap was sprung with brutal efficiency. Jake emerged from the shadows of the cellar stairway, his revolver already drawn. Blackjack stepped out from the kitchen, blocking the intruder's retreat. Eli, revealing skills far beyond those of a simple barman, dropped from a concealed position in the rafters directly behind the last man. "Evening, gentlemen," Martha called, stepping into view with her shotgun leveled. "The last chance is closed for the night." The lead intruder, a lean, hard-faced man with a scar running along his jawline, assessed the situation with cold calculation. "Mrs. Caldwell, I presume." "You have me at a disadvantage," Martha replied evenly. "Jenkins, though that's not important." His hand hovered near his holstered revolver. "We don't want trouble. Yet here you are breaking into my place in the dead of night." Jenkins smiled thinly. "We heard you might be relocating certain items of interest. Our employer would like to purchase them first." "Your employer?" Martha feigned ignorance. "And who might that be?" "A businessman with an interest in the future of Redemption Creek. He believes some old documents might impede progress." "These documents," Martha gestured toward her office where the metal box was visible. "Seems like a lot of trouble for some dusty papers." Jenkins' eyes flickered toward the office. "I'm authorized to offer $5,000. Cash. More than fair for some old records." "Those records document 20 years of corruption in this territory," Martha stated flatly. "Judges taking bribes, officials selling land that wasn't theirs to sell, murders covered up as accidents." Jenkins shrugged. "Ancient history, the territory's moving forward. New railroad, new opportunities. No sense dwelling on the past." Before Martha could respond, a muffled explosion rocked the building. The floor shook, dust raining from the ceiling. "What the—" Blackjack began, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Jenkins needed. He drew his weapon with lightning speed, firing at Jake, even as he dove for cover behind an overturned table. Chaos erupted. The other intruders scattered, drawing their own weapons. Martha fired her shotgun, the blast deafening in the confined space. One attacker went down, clutching his leg. "The warehouse!" Eli shouted over the gunfire. "They've blown the warehouse!" Martha realized with horror what had happened. The small warehouse behind the last chance, where Frank stored supplies and extra ammunition, had been targeted as a diversion. "Frank," she cried, remembering the wounded gunman upstairs. Another explosion, closer this time, sent splinters flying as part of the back wall was blown inward. Through the newly created opening, more attackers poured in. "It's a setup," Jake called, firing steadily at the incoming men. They knew. In the confusion, Jenkins and his remaining men retreated toward the new opening. Martha caught a glimpse of Doc Sullivan at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of shock, or was it guilt? "Doc," she called, "get Frank out through the front." But Doc didn't move. Instead, his eyes locked with Jenkins, a moment of silent communication passing between them. "Traitor!" Blackjack roared, turning his gun toward Doc. Before he could fire, the front doors burst open. Sheriff Parker stood there, backed by several deputies. "Put down your weapons," he ordered. "All of you." For a moment, no one moved. Then Jenkins smiled coldly. "Sheriff, thank God you're here. These people attacked us without provocation." "That's a lie," Martha countered. "They broke in." "We were invited," Jenkins insisted smoothly. "A business meeting with Mrs. Caldwell that turned violent when she tried to extort us." Parker looked between them, his expression unreadable. "I heard explosions." "They blew up Frank's warehouse," Eli exclaimed, his gun still trained on one of the attackers. "After she opened fire," Jenkins countered. "Self-defense, Sheriff." Martha could see the battle unfolding behind Parker's eyes, duty versus truth, law versus justice. Before he could decide, another figure appeared in the doorway behind him. "What's happening here, Sheriff?" Judge Hargrove demanded, stepping inside. He was followed by Anderson and several townspeople, many armed with rifles and shotguns. "Judge, these men attacked my property," Martha stated firmly. Hargrove's cold eyes surveyed the scene. That's not what I see, Mrs. Caldwell. I see armed men in your establishment during a time of town emergency. Emergency? Blackjack questioned. The warehouse explosion wakened half the town, Hargrove explained. Mr. Anderson's safety committee responded to protect the citizens. Martha felt the trap closing around her. Jenkins and his men were slowly backing toward the exit, their weapons no longer raised but still ready. Will, Martha addressed the sheriff directly, you know what's happening here. These men broke in. They admitted they came for Thomas's documents. Parker's jaw tightened. Everyone lower your weapons. Now, Judge, with all due respect, your safety committee has no legal standing. I'll handle this. For a tense moment, it seemed Hargrove might challenge the sheriff's authority. Then he nodded curtly. Of course, Sheriff. We simply came to offer assistance. The assistance I need, Parker said firmly, is for everyone to clear this area while I sort this out. As the townspeople reluctantly withdrew, Martha noticed Jenkins and his men slipping away in the confusion. Doc Sullivan remained frozen at the top of the stairs, his face ashen. When only Parker, his deputies, and Martha's people remained, the sheriff holstered his weapon with a heavy sigh. Martha, I can't protect you much longer, he admitted quietly. The town's turning. After tonight. Another explosion interrupted him, this one devastating in its intensity. The entire building shook, and a section of the ceiling collapsed, sending burning debris crashing into the main room. Frank's still upstairs, Martha cried, moving toward the stairs despite the flames now spreading rapidly. Jake caught her arm. Too dangerous. Back door. They fought their way through smoke and flame toward the rear of the building. Outside, the night sky glowed orange as fire consumed the warehouse and spread to the back of the Last Chance. In the alley, they regrouped Martha, Jake, Blackjack, and Eli. Of Miguel and Frank, there was no sign. They set us up, Blackjack growled, coughing from the smoke. Doc told them everything. Where is he? Martha demanded, searching the growing crowd of onlookers. There. Eli pointed to a figure hurrying away down a side street, Doc Sullivan, moving with surprising speed for a man his age. Before they could pursue, Sheriff Parker emerged from the burning building, supporting Frank Cooper. The old gunman was coughing violently, blood staining his shirt. Found him, trying to get to the roof. Parker gasped, lowering Frank gently to the ground. Martha knelt beside Frank, cradling his head. Frank, stay with us. Frank's eyes fluttered open, recognition dawning. Martha, it was Doc. Saw him, planning something in the warehouse earlier. Tried to stop him. Save your strength, Martha urged, pressing a handkerchief to a wound on his side. Frank gripped her hand with surprising strength. Listen, Doc believes he's doing right. Thinks the documents will destroy the town. The town's already destroying itself, Martha replied bitterly. Frank's breathing became more labored. Miguel went after Silas. Hotel on Pine. Martha exchanged alarmed glances with Jake. Miguel going alone after Blackwood was suicide. Parker, she called to the sheriff. We need a doctor. But Parker's attention was elsewhere. Judge Hargrove had returned this time with Anderson and a larger group of armed townspeople. As I suspected, Hargrove announced loudly, pointing at the burning building, a den of violence and criminality endangering our entire community. Parker stepped forward. Judge, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time Sheriff Hargrove cut him off. These people have brought Blackwood's vengeance down on all of us. 2 buildings burning already. How many more before you act? Martha stood facing Hargrove directly. You orchestrated this. You and Blackwood. Hargrove's face registered genuine shock. Mrs. Caldwell, grief has clearly affected your judgment. I've been working to protect this town while you harbor fugitives and criminals. The only criminal here is the one paying Blackwood to destroy my property so you can build your precious railroad hotel where my saloon stands, Martha challenged. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even Anderson looked momentarily uncertain. Hargrove recovered quickly. Outrageous accusations won't save you, Mrs. Caldwell. Sheriff, I demand you arrest these people for public endangerment and suspected arson. Parker looked torn, caught between duty and conscience. "Judge, I need to investigate before making arrests." "Then investigate," Hargrove snapped, "but contain the danger. Mr. Anderson's committee will secure the area and ensure these people remain in town until the investigation is complete." It was a compromise that satisfied no one but Parker had little choice. As the crowd dispersed to fight the fire and secure the perimeter, Martha knelt again beside Frank. "Hold on," she whispered. "We'll get you help." Frank's eyes were glassy with pain. "Too late for me, Martha, but not for the truth." His breathing grew more ragged. "Thomas, he wasn't who you thought. He made deals with Blackwood years ago." Martha froze. "What?" "Protected certain operations in exchange for peace in town." Frank coughed, blood speckling his lips. "When he wanted out, Blackwood killed him." The revelation struck Martha like a physical blow. Thomas had collaborated with the very man who ultimately murdered him. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, tears forming, despite her efforts to remain strong. Frank's hand found hers. "Thomas loved you, wanted to be the man you thought he was. In the end, he tried to make it right." His grip suddenly tightened. "Doc knows everything. Find him before he—" "Shut my—" Frank's words trailed off as a final breath rattled from his lungs. Martha clutched the old gunman's hand as the light faded from his eyes. Another piece of her world, another connection to Thomas gone. Around her, the Last Chance Saloon, her home and livelihood for 15 years, burned in the night. The documents that Thomas had kept as insurance, the secrets of the powerful men who ruled the territory, might already be destroyed. And somewhere in Redemption Creek, Silas Blackwood watched and waited, while Doc Sullivan carried the truth that could save or condemn them all. Jake placed a hand on Martha's shoulder. "We need to move. Find Miguel before he gets himself killed." Martha gently closed Frank's eyes. "And Doc. We find Doc and make him tell us everything." In the orange glow of the fire, Martha's face hardened. This was no longer just about protecting her property or Thomas's legacy. It was about survival and justice long overdue. As they slipped away from the burning building, Martha glanced back one last time at the place that had been her sanctuary and prison. Whatever lay ahead there would be no going back. The last chance was gone, but the reckoning had only just begun. Rain fell over Redemption Creek for the first time in months, a gentle patter that did little to extinguish the smoldering remains of the Last Chance Saloon, but washed the ash from the air. Dawn revealed the true extent of the destruction, the saloon reduced to charred timbers and collapsed walls, the warehouse nothing but a blackened foundation. Martha Caldwell stood in the drizzle surveying the ruins of her life. She'd spent the night in Sheriff Parker's office, not as a prisoner, he'd insisted, but for her protection. The protection had felt hollow with Anderson's vigilantes, watching the jailhouse from across the street. "I'm sorry, Martha," when Parker said, joining her before the wreckage. "Truly." Martha's face revealed nothing. The shock of Frank's death and his revelations about Thomas had left her numb, a coldness settling into her bones that had nothing to do with the rain. "Did your deputies find Miguel?" she asked, her voice flat. Parker shook his head. "No sign of him, or of Doc Sullivan. And Blackwood checked out of the hotel before sunrise. No one's seen him since." Martha turned to face him directly. "And will your investigation reveal the truth, Sheriff? That Blackwood was hired to destroy my property? That Judge Hargrove orchestrated this whole charade?" Parker glanced nervously at the vigilantes watching from a distance. "Martha, you don't have proof." "I don't need proof to know the truth." She cut him off. "And neither do you." She turned back to the ruins, her eyes fixing on something glinting amid the debris. Carefully picking her way through the charred remains, Martha knelt and retrieved a small, half-melted object, the key she had worn around her neck, the key to the cellar where Thomas had kept his documents. "The cellar might have survived," Parker observed, following her gaze to where the saloon's foundation remained partially intact. "Maybe," Martha replied, pocketing the key. "But Judge Hargrove's men will be watching. I won't get near it without being seen." "I could create a distraction," Parker offered hesitantly. "Buy you some time." Martha studied him, surprised. "Why would you help me?" Parker removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Because Frank Cooper was right about Thomas. I was a deputy when your husband was sheriff. I saw things, arrangements, compromises. Thomas wasn't perfect, but in the end, he tried to do what was right. By keeping evidence of corruption instead of exposing it, Martha asked bitterly. By trying to change the system from within, Parker corrected. When that failed, yes, he kept evidence as insurance. But Martha, he was going to expose it all. That's why Blackwood killed him. This new perspective on her husband's actions left Martha momentarily speechless. Had Thomas truly planned to make amends for his complicity, or was this just another comforting lie? Meet me behind the general store at noon, Parker said, replacing his hat. I'll have 20 minutes of distraction for you. Make it count. As he walked away, Martha caught sight of Jake Winters approaching from the direction of the livery stable. His clothes were dirty, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes remained alert. No sign of Miguel, he reported quietly. But I found something else. Doc Sullivan's horse is still in the livery. Wherever he went, he didn't leave town. Then he's hiding, Martha concluded. Or being held. Jake nodded. My guess, Hargrove's estate. It's the only place in town big enough to hide someone without questions. And Eli, where is he? Playing his part, talking to the right people, listening even more. Martha took one last look at the ruins of her home. Parker's going to create a diversion at noon. I need to check the cellar, see if anything survived. It's too dangerous, Jake argued. Hargrove's people will be watching. And then we'll need to be creative. Martha replied, a plan already forming in her mind. I need you to find Blackjack. Tell him to be ready. By midday, a crowd had gathered in Redemption Creek's town square. Sheriff Parker stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by his deputies, addressing the anxious citizens. Understand your concerns, he was saying, but vigilante justice is not the answer. We have laws, procedures. From her position behind the general store, Martha could see Anderson and his committee members at the front of the crowd, their posture confrontational. Judge Hargrove stood nearby, his expression smug as Parker struggled to maintain order. Now, Martha whispered to Blackjack, who nodded and slipped away toward the rear of the crowd. Moments later, a commotion erupted at the far end of the square. Blackjack, his face concealed by a bandana, fired 2 shots into the air and shouted, Blackwood's men coming from the North Road. The effect was instantaneous. The crowd scattered in panic, some running for cover, others rushing toward the supposed threat. Sheriff Parker and his deputies moved to contain the situation, while Anderson rallied his vigilantes to confront the non-existent attackers. In the confusion, Martha darted across the street and into the ruins of the Last Chance. The cellar entrance, partially obscured by fallen debris, remained intact. Her hands trembled as she fitted the key into the lock, praying the mechanism had survived the fire. The lock turned with a reluctant groan. Martha descended the narrow stairs into darkness, the smell of smoke giving way to the damp earthiness of the underground space. To her relief, the cellar appeared largely untouched by the firestone walls, and floor had protected its contents from the inferno above. She moved quickly to the far wall, counting stones until she found the one Thomas had shown her years ago. It shifted under her touch, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside was a metal strongbox, scorched but intact. Martha grabbed the box and turned to leave, only to find Doc Sullivan standing at the foot of the stairs, a revolver trained on her. Martha, he said, his voice weary, I figured you'd come back for that. Doc. Martha held the box tightly against her chest. Come to finish what you started. The old man's face creased with pain. I never wanted this, Martha. Never wanted anyone hurt, especially not Frank. But you betrayed us anyway, Martha said coldly. Helped Blackwood destroy my home. I helped try to save this town. Doc countered, his gun hand trembling slightly. Those documents, they'll tear Redemption Creek apart. Years of corruption, Martha. Half the founding families implicated. The good along with the bad. The truth isn't what destroys communities, Doc. It's the secrets. The lies. Doc shook his head. Pretty sentiment. But I've seen what happens when these kinds of secrets come out. Blood in the streets, neighbor against neighbor. Everything Thomas worked for, everything we all worked for, gone. Martha studied him, seeing not a villain but a frightened old man clinging to a flawed vision of peace. So you made a deal with Blackwood? Not Blackwood, Doc clarified. Hargrove. The judge approached me months ago. Said he knew what Thomas had hidden, offered to make sure those documents never saw the light of day in exchange for my help. Help betraying your friends, Doc winced. Help preserving the peace. Hargrove had a plan, buy out the last chance, develop the land, bring the railroad through. Progress, Martha. Real opportunity for folks who've scratched dirt for decades. And destroy evidence of his crimes in the process, Martha added. How convenient. Life is rarely simple, Martha. Good people do bad things. Bad people occasionally do good. Thomas understood that. Martha's grip tightened on the box. Frank told me about Thomas, about his arrangements with Blackwood. Doc nodded slowly. Thomas made compromises, let certain operations continue outside town limits, kept the violence away from decent folks. Until he couldn't live with it anymore, Martha guessed. He was going to expose everything. Doc confirmed. Not just Blackwood, but Hargrove, the territorial officials, all of it. I tried to talk him out of it. Told him it would destroy everything we'd built. So instead, Blackwood destroyed him. Martha's voice caught. And you're helping the people responsible. Doc's gun lowered slightly, his resolve visibly wavering. I thought I was choosing the lesser evil, Martha. Hargrove promised no one would get hurt. Just the documents, just the saloon. A property dispute, nothing more. And you believed him? Martha said flatly. I wanted to, Doc admitted. But then Frank found me at the warehouse. He wasn't supposed to be there. We struggled and... His voice broke. I never meant for the explosion to happen that way. Martha felt cold rage building inside her. You killed Frank. It was an accident. Doc insisted, distress evident in his voice. The detonator, it went off too soon. I tried to save him, Martha. I swear I did. Like you tried to save Thomas. Doc's face crumpled. I didn't know Blackwood would kill Thomas. None of us did. By the time I realized Hargrove had ordered the hit, it was too late. Martha took a step forward, ignoring the gun. What did you say, Hargrove? Doc repeated, his voice hollow. He orchestrated Thomas's murder, used Blackwood as his weapon, then drove him out of the territory afterward. Made himself look like a hero leading the effort to capture the killers. The revelation knocked the breath from Martha's lungs. Not just corruption, but the calculated murder of her husband planned by the town's most respected citizen. That's why you're really helping him, Martha realized. He knows you know. Doc nodded miserably. I had a choice, help him or join Thomas in an unmarked grave. Before Martha could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs behind Doc. He turned, his gun wavering as Jake emerged from the shadows. Put it down, Doc, Jake said quietly, his own weapon leveled. You're done. Doc looked between them, defeat etched in the lines of his face. Slowly, he lowered his revolver. I just wanted peace, he whispered, for all of us. Peace built on murder isn't peace, Jake replied, taking Doc's gun. It's just a pretty cage. Miguel Ortega was alive. Battered, bruised, but alive. They found him in Doc's small house on the edge of town, tied to a chair, his face swollen from a beating. Eli had tracked him there following one of Anderson's men, who had been delivering food. Tried to get to Blackwood, Miguel explained as Martha cleaned his wounds. Made it to the hotel, but they were waiting. 4 of them. I took 2 down before something hit me from behind. Blackwood? Martha asked. Miguel shook his head. Never saw him. Just his men. They wanted to know about the documents, about what Thomas had written down. Did you tell them anything? Nothing to tell. You never shared what was in those papers, Martha. Not even with us. Martha placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder. I'm sorry I kept you in the dark. I thought I was protecting you. Secrets protect no one, Jake observed from the doorway, where he stood watch. They just postponed the reckoning. Doc Sullivan sat in the corner unbound, but defeated, his shoulders slumped. What happens now? He asked hoarsely. Martha looked at the strongbox she'd retrieved from the cellar, still unopened. Now we learn exactly what Thomas was willing to die for? The box held several leather-bound journals, their pages filled with Thomas Caldwell's neat handwriting. Dates, names, transactions, a meticulous record of corruption spanning 15 years. Land deals manipulated to benefit Hargrove and his associates. Mines seized from legitimate owners through forged documents. Even murder disguised as accidents or blamed on raiders. Sweet Jesus, Blackjack muttered as they reviewed the contents. Half the territory's leadership is implicated. Including Thomas, Martha noted grimly. At least in the beginning. She turned to the final journal written in the months before Thomas's death. Here his tone changed regret, replacing the clinical detachment of earlier entries. Plans for making amends for exposing the corruption, even at the cost of his own freedom. The last entry was dated 3 days before his murder. Confronted Hargrove today. Told him I'm ending our arrangement. He threatened me, of course, but I have insurance now. Everything documented, hidden where he'll never find it. If anything happens to me, Martha knows where to look. Blackwood arrives tomorrow to discuss the new terms. This ends now, one way or another. Martha closed the journal, her hands trembling. He knew they might kill him. He was trying to make things right, Doc said softly. In the end. And now Hargrove's trying to erase it all, Jake added. Starting with the last chance. Eli, who had been keeping watch at the window, suddenly tensed. Riders coming. Looks like Anderson and his men. Martha made a swift decision. Jake, take the journals. Find Sheriff Parker. Show him the evidence. And what will you do? Jake asked. Martha checked the load in her revolver. I'm going to have a word with Judge Hargrove. The Hargrove estate stood on a hill overlooking Redemption Creek, a monument to wealth and power. Martha approached on foot alone, the rain having given way to a heavy mist that shrouded her approach. She had expected guards, but found none. The front door was unlocked, opening into a silent foyer, decorated with expensive furnishings imported from the east. Judge Hargrove, Martha called, her voice echoing in the empty space. Movement from the library drew her attention. Elizabeth Hargrove appeared in the doorway, dressed for travel. Mrs. Caldwell, she said, her composure slipping for the first time since Martha had known her. You shouldn't be here. Where is your husband? Gone, Elizabeth replied. He left for Carson City this morning. Business with the Railroad Commission. Martha doubted the explanation. Funny time to leave town with everything that's happening. Elizabeth's eyes darted toward the staircase. I'm afraid you've had a wasted journey. If you'll excuse me, I have preparations to make. Running away, Mrs. Hargrove, Martha pressed. Does your husband know Thomas kept records of everything, including the order to have him killed? The color drained from Elizabeth's face. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you know exactly what happened to my husband, what your husband arranged. A floorboard creaked overhead. Martha raised her revolver toward the sound. He's here, isn't he? Martha asked quietly. Not your husband. Blackwood. Elizabeth's composure cracked entirely. Please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Martha cut her off. Blackwood's job wasn't finished. The documents survived the fire. Now he's here to tie up loose ends before disappearing with his payment. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Silas Blackwood appeared, a tall man with cold eyes and a neat beard threaded with gray. Unlike the theatrical outlaws of dime novels, he dressed like a businessman, his only concession to frontier life the revolver holstered at his hip. Mrs. Caldwell, he greeted her, his voice cultured and controlled. I've been expecting you. Martha kept her weapon trained on him. Have you now? Of course. You're your husband's wife, after all. Thomas was predictable in his righteousness. I assumed you would be too. Is that why you killed him, because he became too righteous? Blackwood descended the last few steps, maintaining a careful distance. I killed him because he broke our arrangement. Business, Mrs. Caldwell. Nothing personal. It was personal to me, Martha replied, her finger tightening on the trigger. Understandable. Blackwood gestured toward a sitting room. Perhaps we could discuss this like civilized people without firearms. There's nothing to discuss. You're going to pay for what you did. Blackwood sighed. By shooting me? Then what? The evidence in those journals will still destroy this town. The innocent, along with the guilty. Justice isn't always neat, Martha said coldly. No, it isn't, Blackwood agreed, which is why I've come to offer you an alternative. Despite herself, Martha was curious. What alternative? The truth, Blackwood said simply. The complete truth, not just what Thomas wrote in his journals. Names, dates, details he never knew. In exchange for my freedom. Why would you betray your employers? Blackwood smiled thinly. Because Judge Hargrove has already betrayed me. The payment he promised intercepted by his men this morning. They tried to kill my associate, the man you know as Jenkins. Unfortunately for them, Jenkins is rather difficult to kill. Martha considered the offer. And I'm supposed to trust you? Trust has nothing to do with it. Self-interest, Mrs. Caldwell. Hargrove has made himself my enemy. I simply wish to return the favor before I leave this territory for good. From outside came the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving fast. It seems our time grows short, Blackwood observed. What will it be, Mrs. Caldwell, justice for your husband, or truth for the territory? Jake, the ghost. Winters found Sheriff Parker at the telegraph office sending an urgent message to the territorial marshal. When Jake revealed the contents of Thomas Caldwell's journals, Parker's face darkened with each page he turned. This goes beyond Redemption Creek, Parker said grimly. Territorial officials, federal land agents, all of them on Hargrove's payroll. Will the marshal help? Jake asked. Parker shook his head. Marshal Reynolds is named in these pages. We're on our own. Not entirely, came a voice from the doorway. Eli stood there accompanied by a man Jake didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with a badge pinned to his vest. Special Agent Robert Miller, Justice Department, the man introduced himself. I've been investigating Judge Hargrove for 6 months. How did you? Parker began. Eli works for me, Miller explained. We placed him at the last chance when we heard rumors Blackwood had been hired to destroy evidence. Jake turned to Eli, reassessing the young man he'd thought was just a drifter. You're a federal agent. Assistant, Eli corrected. Still learning the trade. Miller took the journal Jake had been showing Parker. This is exactly what we've been looking for. Proof of Hargrove's corruption. Combined with the witnesses we've already turned, it's enough to bring down his entire operation. Witnesses? Parker questioned. Including Jenkins, Miller confirmed. Blackwood's right-hand man. We captured him this morning trying to leave town with a payment from Hargrove. He's been quite forthcoming since we explained the alternative. Jake suddenly realized something. Martha went to confront Hargrove at his estate. Miller's expression turned grim. Hargrove isn't there. He left for Carson City before dawn. But Blackwood might be, Jake said, already moving toward the door. We need to get there now. When Sheriff Parker, Jake, and Agent Miller arrived at the Hargrove estate with a dozen armed men, they found Martha Caldwell sitting calmly in the parlor. Across from her, Elizabeth Hargrove wept quietly, her composure finally shattered. Of Silas Blackwood, there was no sign. Martha! Jake approached cautiously, noting her unusual calm. What happened? Martha handed him a thick envelope. Blackwood's insurance policy. Every detail of his arrangements with Hargrove, including the order for Thomas's murder. Names, dates, bank transfers, everything. Where is he? Parker demanded, looking around as if expecting an ambush. Gone, Martha replied simply. I let him go. You what? Jake stared at her in disbelief. I made a choice, Jake. Justice for Thomas or justice for everyone Hargrove has hurt over the years. She nodded toward the envelope. With that evidence in Thomas's journals, the territory can finally clean house. Blackwood was just one weapon Hargrove wielded. I chose to dismantle the entire operation. Miller examined the documents, his expression growing increasingly satisfied. This is comprehensive. Combined with what we already have, it's more than enough for convictions. And Judge Hargrove, Parker asked. Telegram just came through from Carson City, Miller replied. He's been detained attempting to board a train east. It's over. Martha looked at Elizabeth Hargrove, who had fallen silent, her future in ruins. Not quite over, Martha corrected. Just beginning, really. The rebuilding of the Last Chance began 1 week later, not as a saloon, but as what Martha called the Hall of Fire, a meeting place for the community and a repository for truth. Thomas Caldwell's journals, along with Blackwood's evidence, had indeed shaken the territory to its foundations. Arrests continued daily as the corruption Hargrove had fostered was exposed and dismantled. Some of Redemption Creek's most prominent citizens now faced prison sentences, while others had fled, abandoning homes and businesses in their haste to escape justice. Doc Sullivan, in recognition of his eventual cooperation, received a reduced sentence, 5 years instead of 20. Before being taken to the territorial prison, he'd visited the construction site, his eyes filled with regret. "I was wrong, Martha," he'd admitted. "Peace without truth is just another prison." "Hinari, a prison you helped build," Martha had replied, not unkindly, "but also one you helped tear down in the end." Miguel Ortega and Blackjack Reynolds had stayed to help with the rebuilding, their gunfighting days finally behind them. The town, shaken by the revelations about its leadership, had begun the slow process of healing, electing new officials, establishing transparent governance, looking toward a future built on truth rather than convenient lies. On the morning the new building's framework was completed, Martha stood with Jake watching as workers raised the final beam into place. "You never opened the cellar safe, did you?" Jake asked quietly. "The one beneath the bar." Martha smiled faintly. "There was never any gold, Jake." "I know that, but there was something else, something even Thomas didn't write in his journals." Martha nodded slowly. "The deed to the land. The original deed proving that half the territory was legally purchased from the native tribes, not conquered, as Hargrove claimed when he seized it for development. With that document, the rightful owners could reclaim what was stolen from them. And you kept it hidden even now." "Some truths need the right moment," Martha replied. "The territory's in chaos already. Adding a land dispute that could dispossess half the innocent settlers wouldn't serve justice." "So when," Jake pressed, Martha watched as Eli, now openly working as Agent Miller's assistant, directed the placement of support beams. "When the new territorial government is established," she decided, "when there's a system that can address the claim, fairly compensate those who purchase land in good faith from Hargrove, and restore what rightfully belongs to others." Jake nodded his understanding. "Always the long game with you, Martha Caldwell." "I learned from Thomas's mistakes," she said softly. "Justice without wisdom is just another form of violence." As the frame of the new building took shape against the sky, Martha felt a weight lifting, not gone entirely, but lighter than it had been in 7 years. Thomas had tried to make amends in the end, had died trying to right his wrongs. She would finish what he started, but in her own way, with the wisdom hard-won through fire and loss. That evening, as sunset painted the western sky in shades of amber and gold, the citizens of Redemption Creek gathered before the partially constructed Hall of Fire. Martha stood on the new porch facing the community that had nearly destroyed her, and that she had nearly lost. "We've all made mistakes," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "My husband included. Thomas Caldwell was not a perfect man nor a perfect sheriff. He compromised when he shouldn't have looked away, when he should have stood firm." She paused, looking at the faces before her: miners and merchants, farmers and craftsmen, former enemies and newfound allies. "But in the end, he chose truth over comfort, courage over safety. He died trying to break the cycle of corruption that threatened to become this town's legacy." From the crowd, a voice called out, "Why rebuild here after everything that happened?" Martha considered the question. "Because running away doesn't change anything. Because this land has seen too much blood to simply abandon it. Because redemption isn't just the name of our creek, it's the work we're all called to do." She gestured to the rising framework behind her. "This won't be a saloon anymore. We don't need more places to escape reality. What we need is a place to face it together. The Hall of Fire will stand as a reminder of what we lost, what we learned, and what we're building together." Sheriff Parker stepped forward. "The territorial governor has appointed a special commission to address the damage done by Judge Hargrove's corruption. Stolen properties will be returned, false charges dismissed." "What about Blackwood?" someone asked. "He's still out there." Martha exchanged glances with Jake. Silas Blackwood was a symptom, not the disease. The real sickness was the corruption that hired him, that turned justice into a commodity to be bought and sold. "That doesn't mean he shouldn't pay for his crimes," another voice objected. "No, it doesn't," Martha agreed. "And one day he will. But today isn't about vengeance. It's about moving forward without forgetting what brought us here." As darkness fell, lanterns were lit around the construction site, casting long shadows against the partially framed walls. Martha watched as townspeople who had stood with Anderson's vigilantes now worked alongside those who had defended the last chance, united in the common purpose of rebuilding. Jake came to stand beside her, his weathered face thoughtful in the lantern light. "Do you think it will last?" he asked quietly. "This unity," Martha observed the scene before them, a community beginning to heal to reckon with its past while working toward its future. "Nothing lasts forever," she replied. "But some things endure longer than others. Truth, justice, the choices we make when facing our worst mistakes." In her pocket, Martha carried the key to the cellar safe, the final secret still waiting to be revealed when the time was right. Thomas had believed in the power of evidence to force change. Martha now understood that true change required more than exposure. It required the wisdom to know when to reveal, when to confront, and when to rebuild. Silas Blackwood's body was discovered 3 days later, hanged upside down from a tree outside Carson City. A message pinned to his chest: "Justice comes for everyone eventually." The territorial marshal investigated, but found no witnesses, no evidence pointing to any particular suspect. When Martha heard the news, she said nothing. Some justice happened in courtrooms, some in the quiet corners of conscience, and some in the shadowed spaces where old debts were finally paid. The Hall of Fire was completed as autumn painted the surrounding hills in russet and gold. Unlike the Last Chance Saloon with its rough-hewn practicality, the new building combined beauty with purpose. Large windows to let in light, walls lined with bookshelves holding copies of territorial law community records, and the documented history of Redemption Creek, both glorious and shameful. On opening day, Martha stood before the main doors, the key in her hand. The town had gathered once again, but this time with anticipation rather than suspicion. "We don't need guns to defend what matters most," she told them, her voice strong and clear in the autumn air. "But that doesn't mean we forget the blood spilled to bring us this moment of peace." She unlocked the doors, revealing the central hall with its high ceiling and walls adorned with names, every person who had contributed to building the new structure alongside those who had been lost in the town's troubled history. "This is our legacy now," Martha declared. "Not secrets buried beneath floorboards, but truth displayed where all can see it, learn from it, and ensure it never repeats." As the townspeople filed inside, Martha remained on the porch watching as Redemption Creek embraced its new beginning. Beside her stood Jake Miguel and Black Jack, the last of the gunslingers who had found, if not peace, then purpose in the aftermath of violence. "What now?" Jake asked quietly. Martha smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years. "Now we live, Jake. Not just survive, but truly live." In the distance, the sound of hammering marked the beginning of construction on the railroad spur that would connect Redemption Creek to the wider world. Progress was coming after all, but on the town's terms, founded on justice, transparency, and the hard-won wisdom that peace without truth was merely a prelude to greater violence. Martha touched the key she still wore around her neck, no longer the key to buried secrets, but to the Hall of Fire's main doors. A different kind of power, a different kind of protection. "Thomas would be proud," Jake observed, following her gaze as she looked out over the changed town. "Yes," Martha agreed softly. "I think finally he would."